What's going on, Midnight Mafia? I hope that way he knows that he is loved as well, because don't we all just want to be loved? Seriously though, this is very exciting. This is our first collaboration ever, both of us. We are both never done this before. You could call us virgins if you want. You don't have to, but you could. So please hit that like button so we know that you actually like different creators collaborating. And if you do hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed, then guess what? We're gonna bring you more and more and more collabs. And we got a lot of good things in the pipe. So without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Okay, so what you are in store for is the case of Maria Martin, and it became one of England's most talked about crimes. And it's not just murder that was involved. There were also tales of secret relationships, supernatural abilities, vengeful mobs, and an ominous curse that lingered over everything in the end. Maria Martin came into this world in 1801, born to a family of meager means. Her father, Thomas, worked as a mole catcher in a small village of Polstead in Suffolk, and relying on his skill at skinning moles and crafting their hides into gloves for their income. And sadly, after Maria's mother passed away, Thomas married a woman named Anne, a woman only slightly older than his daughter. So despite her humble beginnings, Maria was known for her stunning looks and her intelligence. And according to one story, a fortune teller predicted that she would have numerous admirers and wealth, but would not live to see old age. And as it turned out, 2 of those 3 prophecies came true. And Maria's love life began in her early 20s when she entered into a romantic relationship with Thomas Corder, the son of a prosperous farm owner. However, when Maria became pregnant, Thomas deserted her. But in no time at all, Maria found a new partner to replace Corder, a man by the name of Peter Matthews. Sadly, too, Maria's child with Corder passed away shortly after being born. But when Maria became pregnant once again, this time with Matthew's child, she learned that he also had no interest in taking on the responsibility of fatherhood or facing the inevitable gossip and judgment that came with having a child outside of marriage. But he promised to, provide financial support, but wanted nothing to do with their raising of the child or being involved in any of their lives. And as soon as Maria delivered her baby, she was introduced to Thomas Corder's younger brother, William. Now, William was known for his thievery and involvement in petty crimes. William had been sent off to London by his father with a small sum of money in hopes that he would find employment and turn over a new leaf. But William wasted the money on indulgent pleasures and turned to a life of illegal activities. But when his father and brother suddenly fell ill, he was forced to return to the farm and help his mother manage it. And unfortunately, William's father succumbed to tuberculosis, and his brothers were left permanently disabled by the disease. Then Thomas, William's eldest brother, who had a child with Maria, tragically passed away after falling through ice into a freezing lake. I mean, it seems like death just follows this person or family around. And soon after, William's other brother also died prematurely, leaving William head of the household and in charge of their family farm. And it was during this time that he began an illicit relationship with Maria. So naturally, Maria's parents were not supportive of her relationship with William, given his questionable reputation and the fact that his brother had abandoned her while she was pregnant with their child. So, as a result, William and Maria had to sneak around to see one another. And where they would sneak around to see each other was a well-known landmark in town called the Red Barn. And that became kind of their secret meeting spot. So after several encounters there, Maria discovered she was pregnant once again for the third time. But unlike his brother, William made a promise to marry Maria and take care of the family. And despite any doubts, Maria's circumstances demanded that she put her reservations aside. As a poor single mother in the early 19th century England, she had already brought great shame upon herself by having multiple children out of wedlock. And William, now from the inheritance of the farm, was a wealthy landowner and could potentially be her last chance at finding a husband who would not only marry her, but also provide for her and her family. So, in an effort to avoid gossip and the scrutiny of the town, William sent Maria away to Sudbury to give birth to their child. But tragically, once again, the baby passed away just 2 weeks later and was buried in secret to protect both of their reputations from the scandalous label of illegitimacy. And there were rumors that William may have played a role in the child's death, as he was not planning on marrying Maria despite the relationship. And after the tragedy, their relationship became more turbulent and they just constantly argued. And Maria at that time suspected that William was actually taking Peter Matthews' child support money. And although William claimed that he still wanted to marry her, he never made any concrete plans. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, William had a change of heart and suggested that they elope in Ipswich. He even told her that there was a warrant out for her arrest because she had illegitimate children. And it's uncertain if this was actually true or just a ploy to pressure Maria into a rushed marriage. And some accounts mention Maria disguising herself as a man to avoid arrest and meet William on their planned elopement night. Was this, the suggestion from William to ensure that no one could actually identify Maria? Okay, so the Red Barn was the last place Maria was seen alive. It was on that fateful day of May 18th, 1827, when William lured her there with the promises of love and a future together. But as the sun set and the darkness crept in, Maria's fate was sealed. William had carefully crafted a web of lies to deceive her family and the town. He claimed an issue with the marriage certificate, but little did they know it was all part of his twisted plan. And while Maria's family at the time frantically searched for answers, William fled town and embarked on a journey to cover his tracks. So he traveled to London and then ventured to the Isle of Wight, where he penned deceitful letters to Maria's family, claiming that they were finally married and living happily on the island. But the truth remained buried deep within the walls of that Red Barn, haunting those who dared to wonder what truly happened to Maria on that dark night. So William fumbled through a series of feeble and silly excuses, trying to explain why they hadn't had any letters directly from Maria. He insisted that she had been writing and was perplexed as to why her letters were not reaching the family and only his were. Then later on, he claimed that Maria had injured her hand, so she was unable to write to them, but reassured them that everything was fine between them and that they were happily married. So William returned to London and quickly began a new life for himself. In fact, he placed an advertisement in the Times seeking a wife, ultimately choosing Mary Moore, a school teacher, and believe it or not, there were over 100 responses to marry him. So him and Mary, they tied the knot in November 1827 and opened a girls' school in Ealing. But after Maria's disappearance, her stepmother started having these unsettling dreams about where she might be. She was having these visions, and the dreams seemed to hint that Maria had been murdered and buried beneath this red barn, and couldn't shake this feeling that these dreams were trying to tell her something. So she convinced her husband to search the barn. And as shocking as it was, he found a disturbed patch of earth exactly where Anne's dream had indicated. So standing there, armed with his mole-catching spike, he began to dig and eventually uncovered the body of his daughter. And she had been strangled with a green handkerchief, also shot in the face. Not to mention, it appeared to have been stabbed in her chest and neck, although these injuries could have been caused by her father's reckless digging. But there is a theory that suggests Maria's stepmother was having an affair with William, who was closer in age and appearance than her elderly husband. And some people speculated that Anne may have been aware of what happened to Maria and was waiting for William to come back so they could run away together. Crazy chess-type plan, right? But hell have no fury like a woman scorned, because when she learned that William had married someone else in London, she decided to seek revenge by revealing the truth about the murder. Oh, and it is worth noting that Anne's nightmares only began after William's marriage, which was about a year after Maria's death. Isn't it strange that the spirit world didn't start sending her dreams sooner? I mean, after everyone found out, the authorities were notified and immediately began searching for William, and they quickly located him at the schoolhouse with his wife. And despite months of messaging Maria's family and lying about her well-being, William claimed that he had no knowledge of her whereabouts when questioned by the police. However, a French passport was discovered in his possession, indicating that he may have been planning to flee the country. As soon as William Corder was arrested for Maria's murder, the media went into a literal frenzy. Journalists and reporters were convinced of his guilt and wasted no time in writing scandalous articles about the crime. And even before the trial began, William was portrayed as a cold-blooded killer. The public became fascinated with this case, and various forms of media, including books, songs, and plays, all depicted the gruesome details of the murder. Meanwhile, William sat in jail awaiting his trial. The infamous Red Barn, where the murder took place, became a popular tourist site, with pottery and souvenirs being made in its honor. Some people even scavenged pieces of the wood from the barn to sell as mementos, including toothpicks made from its remains. And in the same way, souvenir hunters relentlessly chipped away at Maria's grave, and by the time the trial began on August 7th, 1828, William had already been found guilty in the court of public opinion. And he even brought this up to Judge Alexander, who was presiding over the case, stating, "The all-powerful press, which shapes the opinions of so many individuals in this country and often unintentionally becomes a slanderer and destroyer of innocence, has depicted me as the most vile and repulsive of creatures. I have been portrayed by the media as a depraved monster beyond redemption." Despite William's words, this was all for a request for a change of location, but it was denied and the trial proceeded as planned. And he was facing multiple charges of murder, including stabbing, strangulation, shooting, and even live burial. However, due to the limited forensic technology in the 1800s, it was impossible to determine Maria's exact cause of death. And the court wanted to avoid any chance at all that William could be acquitted on a technicality, so they also charged him with other crimes such as fraud. And it was evident that they were determined to ensure that he faced the consequences for his actions. But did things go too far? You see, the trial was a highly anticipated event, with tickets being sold to those who wanted to witness the proceedings in person. And for those who couldn't get inside, they had to settle for waiting outside to hear the news of the day, and people from all over the country flocked to the town, causing hotels to quickly reach full capacity. Some individuals even resorted to sleeping outdoors, and according to one account, the streets were so crowded that it took officials half an hour just to make their way into the building through the throngs of the onlookers. Now, William's defense crumbled like a house of cards as he desperately tried to explain away Maria's death. But the gaping holes in his story only fueled suspicion and disgust. Why did he hide her death, lying to her family for months while she lay buried in the barn? Was this just all a twisted game or a calculated cover-up? So the evidence against him was overwhelming, but the jury's decision seemed almost predetermined by the frenzy of media coverage surrounding the case. And in just 35 minutes, they delivered a verdict, and that verdict was guilty. And Judge Alexander showed no mercy when he sentenced William to hang for his unforgivable crimes. And instead of being given a proper burial, his body was to be dissected and studied for medical purposes. And during the period leading up to his death, William was constantly harassed by court officials demanding a confession. And in the end, he admitted to causing Maria's death, but unintentionally. He said he had mistakenly shot her in the eye and then buried her in a panic. He maintained, though, that he did not stab her, although he did address the handkerchief that was found around her neck. But regardless of how she died, nothing excuses the fact that he pretended she was alive for months after her death. And 3 days after his conviction, William was publicly hanged with an audience of thousands. In fact, some reports even claim there was over 20,000 people watching. Now, for those of you with squeamish stomachs, this is where you might want to leave. His lifeless body just swung there for a whole hour before it was finally removed. And the executioner had carved this deep incision down his front, displaying his torso to the large crowd of onlookers. And his remains were thoroughly dissected, and his skeleton was repurposed as a tool for medical education. But the hangman saw an opportunity to profit from the macabre fascination surrounding the crime and sold pieces of the rope that were actually used in the hanging. Seeing this, others joined in and auctioned off items like locks of Maria's hair and fragments of the barn where the tragedy took place. And in some strange twist of events, William's scalp and one of his ears were obtained from the dissection and ended up being exhibited at a museum in London. But as a final gruesome act, William's skin was forcibly removed, used to bind a book that detailed his heinous crime. And this leather-bound book bore a permanent reminder of William's despicable deeds, creating an eternal connection between him and his victims. But even in death, William's spirit was not at rest. His ravaged body was put on display in the Hunterian Museum as a macabre attraction for the curious public. And with each passing day, it became increasingly clear that William's soul was not happy with how his remains were being treated. So Dr. John Kilner, an avid follower of the Red Barn murder, acquired William's skull through questionable means. And almost immediately, he began experiencing this string of misfortune, and also haunted by voices and plagued by visions of vengeful ghosts. And then one fateful night, as he lied in bed, a deafening noise shattered the stillness of the house. So he rushed downstairs, and Kilner found that the cabinet containing the cursed skull had been opened on its own accord, and the protective box had cracked open as well, and the skull itself had been thrown across the room. At this moment, terrified and certain that he had unleashed William's angry spirit upon himself, Kilner arranged for a proper Catholic burial for the skull in hopes of appeasing this restless soul. Yet, even after this final act of respect, strange occurrences continued to plague those who came in contact with any of William's remains. And it wasn't until 2004 when descendants of the Corridor family demanded that his body be removed from public display and cremated. And after years of fear and unease surrounding his presence, William could finally rest in peace, or so they thought.